They said she didn't belong, the sheriff laughed. But one quiet cowboy and a single Christmas song changed the whole town. Christmas Eve settled over the town with a brittle cold that made lantern light feel warmer than it was. The square filled slowly with people bundled in coats bringing pies, tin cups and practiced smiles as if the ritual itself could keep loneliness away. Music had been promised and laughter was expected, yet beneath the cheer ran an unease that no one named. The woman arrived early as she always did, carrying small tasks that needed doing, setting out chairs, straightening ribbons, helping where help was needed because usefulness had long been the closest thing to belonging she knew. Snow pressed softly under her boots and the smell of pine and smoke hung in the air, stirring memories of past winters spent watching from the edges. She knew every face in the square, yet few truly knew her beyond the role she played in the background. The sheriff moved through the crowd with ease, his voice loud, his presence unquestioned, shaping the night with rules and jokes and expectations that everyone followed because it was easier than resisting. He spoke of tradition, of how things had always been done, of the joy that came from order and familiarity. His laughter rang out and others joined quickly, not always because they agreed but because agreement kept them safe. She stood near the edge of the gathering, close enough to hear every word, far enough to be forgotten when decisions were made. The music group began to assemble and her heart lifted slightly. Though she did not step forward, she had learned that hope needed to be quiet to survive here. As the sheriff scanned the small stage, his eyes found her and lingered too long. His expression shifted into something casual and dismissive, and with a few easy words he made it clear who the night was meant for and who it was not. He did not raise his voice or sound cruel, yet the message landed heavy and familiar, that some people were meant to enjoy Christmas and others were meant to serve it. A few people laughed softly, others avoided her gaze, pretending to be busy with cups or children. She felt the old tightening in chest, the practiced stillness she used when embarrassment threatened to spill over. She thought of all the Christmases she had spent singing quietly to herself while working late, walking home alone through snow-lit streets. She thought of how the season was supposed to mean warmth, welcome, yet had so often reminded her of distance. The sheriff turned away, satisfied, believing the moment passed and order restored. The lights flickered, the wind carried a faint jingle from somewhere distant, and for a moment the town suspended between what it had always been and something not yet named, unseen by most, present all same. She stood waiting, not for permission but for the night to reveal whether a Christmas would once again pass her or finally see her standing there all along. The moment after the sheriff's words lingered heavier than the cold as the crowd began to shift back into motion, assuming the small cruelty had passed unnoticed as it so often did. The woman stayed still, her hands folded in front of her, feeling the familiar pull to retreat, yet something held her in place. The lantern light trembled as a breeze moved through the square, and that was when the cowboy stepped forward. He had arrived quietly earlier, unnoticed by most, leaning against the rail near the edge, watching the gathering with calm, distant eyes. He was not a man known for speeches or confrontation, and few would have expected him to act at all. Yet as the music group adjusted their places and the sheriff prepared to carry on the program, the cowboy pushed away from the rail and walked toward the center. His boots made a steady sound against the wood, drawing attention without asking for it. Conversation softened and heads turned, not because he demanded silence but because his movement felt intentional. He did not look at the sheriff or challenge him with words. Instead he stepped onto the small platform where the singers were meant to stand, paused for a breath, and then did something unexpected. He removed his hat and held it low at his side, a gesture simple and sincere. Then he stepped back away from the light, leaving the center open and empty. The space he created felt sudden and exposed, like a door opening where there had been a wall for a heartbeat. No one understood what he meant. Some thought he had changed his mind, others assumed he would speak, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed only on the woman standing apart. His eyes carried no pity, no command, only an invitation that asked nothing and promised nothing except choice. The sheriff frowned, sensing control slipping, yet unsure how to stop something that had not broken any rule. The cowboy had not argued or embarrassed him, had not raised a voice or drawn a line, yet the order of the night had shifted. All the same murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion, curiosity and discomfort mixing together. The woman felt her breath catch as she realized the space had been made for her alone. Her first instinct was fear, the sharp kind that warns against hope. She had been invited before, only to be laughed at, only to be reminded of her place. But the cowboy did not move closer and did not urge her forward. He simply waited, giving her the dignity of deciding for herself. The cold seemed to deepen as time stretched and the town held its breath. She thought of how often her life had been shaped by other people's choices, by being placed where she was told and removed when convenient. Now the path forward was clear yet unforced, and that frightened her more than rejection ever had. The lantern light fell across the empty space, warm and patient, and she felt something unfamiliar rise within her. Not courage exactly, but permission. The cowboy had stepped back, not because she was weak but because he believed She took a step forward and the sound of it seemed louder than it should have been. In the hush that followed, her body moved before her thoughts could catch up, carried by something steady and deep that had been waiting years for this moment. The cold air stung her lungs as she reached the open space, and for a heartbeat she wondered if her voice would fail her the way it had failed her in her own imagination so many times before. She closed her eyes not to hide but to gather herself, and when she breathed in it felt like breathing in every winter she had survived, every quiet night, every unspoken hope. The first note came out soft and uncertain, but it was real and it held the sound spread across the square gentle as falling snow, and something in it made people lean closer without realizing they had moved. She did not sing the way trained voices sang, she sang the way lived voices do, shaped by endurance and memory. Her song carried the feeling of long walks home under cold stars, of tables set for fewer people each year, of kindness given without thanks and still given again. It spoke of Christmas not as a perfect moment but as a promise that warmth could return even after long cold seasons. As she sang, her shoulders eased and her voice grew stronger, filling the space the cowboy had cleared for her. Lantern light reflected off faces now softened by recognition because her words reached places that decorations and speeches never had. Children grew still, sensing the importance of the moment even if they could not explain it. The sheriff stood frozen, his authority quieted by something he could not interrupt without revealing its weakness. The cowboy remained at the edge, head bowed, listening not to be seen but to honor the choice he had made. The woman opened her eyes and let the song rise fully, no longer guarded, no longer apologetic. The notes carried both sorrow and hope woven together like threads of the same cloth. The cold no longer bit as sharply because warmth moved through the crowd, not from fire but from connection. When the final line came she did not rush it, she let it breathe, letting the meaning settle into the night before the sound faded naturally into stillness. She stood there, heart racing, breath unsteady, yet her posture calm because she knew she had crossed something that could not be taken from her. Now the silence that followed was not empty but full, holding everything her voice had placed there and refusing to let it be ignored. The silence after her song settled gently over the square like fresh snow, and no one hurried to break it. People realized they were holding their breath and let it out slowly, as if afraid any sudden sound might undo what they had just felt. Faces once guarded now showed softness, surprise, and something close to gratitude. The warmth moving through the crowd had nothing to do with the season and everything to do with recognition, because her voice had reached a place deeper than habit or judgment. The sheriff stood stiff near the front, his authority suddenly uncertain because it depended on reaction, and none came. His laughter from earlier felt distant and out of place now, as though it belonged to another night entirely. No one looked to him for what should happen next. They looked to her. Some lowered their eyes, remembering moments they had turned away. Others nodded quietly, acknowledging a truth they could no longer deny. The cowboy remained where he was, still and unobtrusive, having done nothing more than make room. Yet that simple act now echoed through the square louder than any command ever had. He did not step forward to claim credit and did not meet the sheriff's gaze because the moment did not belong to either of them. It belonged to the shift that had taken place without force. The town felt different, as if an invisible line had been crossed together. Children pressed closer to their parents, sensing the change even if they could not name it. Older faces softened, recalling winters when they too had felt unseen and still endured. The sheriff shifted his weight, boots scraping softly against the ground, the sound small but telling. He seemed unsure whether to speak or step back, and in that hesitation his power thinned further because control could not survive uncertainty. The woman remained in the center, breathing steadily, no longer bracing herself for dismissal. Her hands rested calmly at her sides and her shoulders were relaxed, as if she had finally set something heavy down. Respect moves through the crowd quietly, without announcement, without applause, yet unmistakable. It did not come as a gift to be accepted but as a truth recognized. The night resumed its rhythm, lantern flames flickering again, the wind stirring lightly, yet everything felt changed. The square no longer belonged to one voice or one rule, it belonged to the shared understanding that had taken root in the silence after her song and could not be undone. She stood for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle into her bones, not as weight but as calm, and then she turned and stepped down from the center. The movement felt natural, unhurried, as if she were simply walking forward into a life that had been waiting for her all along. The crowd parted without being asked, making space the way the cowboy had made space for her earlier. Some faces carried soft smiles, others quiet regret, yet all held respect, and that was enough. No one applauded and no one spoke because the moment did not ask for noise, it asked for understanding. The sheriff remained near the edge, smaller now than he had seemed before, his presence no longer shaping the night, and he did not try to reclaim it. The town no longer needed permission to feel what it felt. The woman moved through the square, feeling warmth follow her step by step, not the warmth of praise but the warmth of being seen without conditions. She did not look for the cowboy, yet she sensed him there, steady, and content knowing his role had ended the moment hers began. He followed at a distance, not as a guardian but as a witness, honoring the boundary he had created for her to claim on her own. As she reached the edge of the gathering she paused and looked back once, not with doubt or longing but with quiet certainty that something lasting had changed. Christmas lights glowed softer now, less like decoration and more like welcome. The town would remember this night in small ways, in gentler choices, in voices invited rather than dismissed, in listening where there had once been laughter. She walked on into the darker street beyond the square, carrying no need to prove herself again because she had already done so simply by standing and singing when it mattered most of all. She carried home within her not as a place given by others but as something she had claimed, and that knowledge wrapped around her warmer than any coat. As the music of the evening slowly returned behind her it sounded different, lighter, more honest, and the cowboy watched her go with a quiet smile, knowing that one voice had been enough to bring everyone, including her, back home.